Okay, so you know those excerpts you sent in from Angela's Ashes?
Yeah.
Well, what really got me was how Frank McCourt takes what seems like a pretty normal childhood in Limerick, right? I mean, the family stuff, school, even that whole thing with the stolen banana.
Uh-huh.
But he tells it in this way that's just so vivid and powerful, you know? So today we're going to really dive into those specific moments you picked out.
That was good.
We'll unpack those themes that just jump out at you, the complicated family dynamics, the ever-present struggle of poverty, and that amazing resilience that just shines through no matter what.
It really does.
And who knows, maybe we'll even stumble across some completely unexpected insights along the way.
I'm sure we will.
All right, so the excerpts you shared, they give us this incredible view of the narrator's early years, right? We're right there with him as he navigates family, the community in Limerick, and tries to figure out this often harsh world. But there are those moments of real humanity, too. It's like we get a glimpse into a very specific lived experience, one that's filled with both hardship and, I don't know, a certain kind of vibrant life.
Definitely.
So our goal today isn't just to rehash what happens, but to really get under the surface.
Exactly.
We want to understand the core experiences and how McCourt presents them.
Right.
What do these everyday events tell us about life in Limerick back then? And what about the power of these family narratives, the kind that shape us in such deep ways?
That's a good point.
Okay, so let's jump right in. The McCourt family, they're front and center in these excerpts. They're clearly close, but there's a lot of complexity there, wouldn't you say? And then you have all these really colorful characters swirling around them.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's interesting. Even the seemingly minor characters
Yeah.
give us real insight into what the community valued, like Uncle Pat or Ab Sheehan. He had some significant challenges, both physically and with learning.
Oh, yeah.
But he was so well respected in Limerick because he was surprisingly good at handling money from selling newspapers, I think it was.
You know, that detail really grabs you, right?
Yeah.
Especially back then, certain abilities were probably considered more valuable than others. And here's Ab Sheehan finding respect and even becoming somewhat known for this talent that people didn't expect.
Right.
It really makes you stop and think about how communities define worth, about those hidden talents that might go unnoticed in other places. And it definitely challenges any easy assumptions we might have about, well, who's valuable in a society?
Absolutely. It suggests a much deeper understanding of how people contributed to their community back then. It wasn't just about being strong or book smart.
No, not at all.
Ab Sheehan's knack for managing money, despite his other struggles, carved out a place for him and earned him that respect.
Ooh, I like that.
But moving on to the heart of the family, the parents, they really paint a stark contrast, don't they?
They do, yeah.
Would you agree?
Oh, absolutely. The mother's anxieties and just the sheer effort she puts into everything, especially when it comes to childbirth and keeping the household running in such tough circumstances, it just leaps off the page. Even when the father was working, you get the feeling she was the one holding everything together, always trying to make those meager resources stretch as far as they could and maintain some kind of normalcy in what must have felt like a very unpredictable life. It's her resilience that really strikes me.
Yeah, it's amazing.
It's incredible.
It is those little things, isn't it? Like those brief moments of joy when the father's working and they can afford a bit extra food. And then right alongside that, the constant struggle to keep the kids clean and fed.
Right.
The narrative doesn't sugarcoat the realities of poverty at all. But then there's the father, a really complicated figure. He's the one with the stories. Cuchulainn, those improvised tales about Mr. McAdory and Mr. Leibowitz. The singing. He brings these moments of connection, almost magic, to the children's lives.
Yeah.
But then, of course, there's the shadow of his drinking. That always seems to bring instability with it.
You know, he's definitely not a simple character. On the one hand, there's that deep love for his kids, that urge to make them happy, to create those moments of wonder through his storytelling.
Sure.
Those stories must have been such a source of comfort and escape for them.
Yep.
But then there's that underlying instability, that sense that things could change at any moment. The kids must have been so aware of that. So what does that push and pull, that mix of joy and uncertainty, what does that do to a family?
That's the question, isn't it?
Yeah.
Those moments of storytelling and singing, they almost become sacred spaces.
Oh, I see what you mean.
Little islands of warmth and connection in this really bleak reality of their poverty. The stories and songs they share, They're more than just entertainment.
Right.
They seem to bond the family together, help them create a shared identity, and find some comfort together. It's such a powerful example of how culture, even in its most informal, family-centered form, can help people cope with hardship.
Yeah, I never thought about it like that.
But moving on a bit, those excerpts also show us this really vibrant cast of characters in Limerick and all these institutions that played a big role in shaping the narrator's early life.
Absolutely. Limerick really comes alive through these encounters. We meet everyone from the Italian grocer, forever tied to that stolen banana, such a classic act of childhood rebellion, but with real consequences.
Right.
Then there's Minnie and Mr. McAdory on Aggie and her Uncle Paul Keating and all those interactions with organizations like St. Vincent de Paul and the dispensary. It's this amazing tapestry of human interaction.
It really is. And what stands out to me is the sheer variety of those interactions
Mhm.
and how they reveal all these different sides of life in Limerick. The Italian grocer, first seen as someone to be wary of because of the family's debt,
Right.
he becomes this unexpected source of temptation
Oh, yeah.
and maybe even guilt later on.
Interesting.
Minnie and Mr. McAdory, they offer a glimpse into a world that seems more stable and nurturing.
Yeah.
And Aggie and Uncle Pa, with their own unique personalities and probably their own struggles, represent another part of that extended family support system.
They do.
Don't you think?
Yeah, I do.
And those interactions with St. Vincent de Paul and the dispensary,
Oh, yeah.
those really bring the complexities of relying on charity into focus.
It's tough, isn't it? You see the help being given, which is obviously essential, but there's always this underlying sense of stigma, this feeling of being different, less than. It couldn't have been easy to be on the receiving end of that kind of help, even when it was so desperately needed.
Right. Think about that scene at Mrs. McGrath's shop when the St. Vincent de Paul docket comes out. The way the shopkeeper's attitude changes, it says so much about the social hierarchy back then and how poverty could affect your interactions with people.
Totally.
And the encounters at the dispensary with figures like Mr. Coffee and Mr. Kane, sometimes they were almost dismissive.
They were, weren't they?
Those moments really highlight the power imbalance in those charitable relationships. How do you think those experiences, both receiving help and facing those social barriers, how did they shape the narrator's view of himself and his place in the world?
That's a really good question. It must have created this really complicated internal world, a mix of gratitude, maybe even some resentment, and definitely a growing awareness of how unfair society can be. It wasn't just about getting his physical needs met, it was the emotional and psychological impact of needing that help in the first place.
That's so true.
But those excerpts don't just focus on individual interactions, they also highlight how important institutions like the church and school were in their lives.
Oh, for sure. The church, with things like First Communion and confession, had so much influence.
Yeah.
And school, especially seen through Mr. Odea's pretty unconventional teaching style, was another huge influence.
Mr. Odea sounds like quite the character.
Doesn't he?
Strong opinions, a love for apples, and there's rather unique teaching methods.
Exactly.
And First Communion, which is supposed to be this deeply spiritual event, it's also so tied up with the more practical concerns of the collection and the excitement of going to the cinema.
Yeah.
It's this fascinating mix of the sacred and the everyday, the spiritual and the totally worldly.
That contrast is really important. It shows how those institutions weren't just these monolithic forces.
Yeah.
They were complex places where religious doctrine, social norms, and individual quirks all came together.
Right.
And confession, for a young boy trying to figure out childhood and morality, it became this regular encounter with religious authority and what society expected of him. It makes us think about how those early interactions with these institutions could shape someone's worldview and their relationship with authority figures.
Yeah, it does. You definitely get the sense that the narrator is observing and questioning things, not just blindly accepting them.
Right.
And that brings us to all those vivid childhood experiences and perspectives that are sprinkled throughout the excerpts. From the simple, pure joy of stealing that banana, a perfect example of childhood desire clashing with the reality of being poor, to the much heavier themes of death and the sometimes confusing teachings of the church.
What's so powerful is how those really significant life events, like the deaths of Margaret, Oliver, and Eugene, are seen through the eyes of a child who's innocent but also very perceptive.
Yes.
The raw emotion is right there on the surface, but it's often expressed in this very straightforward, honest way. That simple line, "I don't know why we can't keep Eugene," I don't know why they have to send him away in that box,
Yeah.
is so heartbreaking in its simplicity. And then we see how the family copes with that loss in different ways. The silences, the father escaping into song or alcohol, the mother's grief. It's a very intimate look at how a family deals with profound loss while still facing all these other hardships.
It really
Dun,
is.
dun, dun.
Yeah, and even that banana incident, as small as it seems, it speaks volumes. That immediate craving, the quick thinking to get it, and then having to make up a story to cover it up.
Yeah.
It's like a tiny story that mirrors all the bigger challenges in their lives.
Yeah, exactly.
And those encounters with death, seen through his young eyes, trying to understand something so final, it must have had such a deep impact, shaping his views on mortality and grief at such a young age.
Right. Those early experiences with loss, with the constant presence of hardship,
Yeah,
they would have left a permanent mark.
they would have.
No doubt about it. Now, as the narrator gets older in the excerpts, we start to see him becoming aware of things beyond his immediate family in Limerick.
Yes, those seemingly offhand mentions of English-Irish relations, like when the father warns him about birds and Englishmen.
Yeah.
It's a quick comment, but it carries so much historical weight. It hints at underlying tensions and a strong sense of Irish identity.
What's so interesting there is how those bigger historical and political issues are just woven into everyday life.
They are.
It's not a history lesson.
No.
It's more like these ingrained attitudes and cautionary tales passed down through generations.
Right.
And Brady's comments about Irish accents and English history, they reinforce that sense of a distinct Irish identity, one shaped in part by that historical relationship with England.
They do.
It makes you think about how being exposed to those long-standing tensions at such a young age might have influenced the narrator's sense of self and his place in a wider world.
Right. It must have contributed to a strong feeling of being Irish, of belonging to a particular cultural narrative, even if that narrative is burdened by past injustices.
Absolutely.
It becomes part of their shared worldview.
It does.
And then, running through all of this is the ever-present reality of poverty and its impact on every aspect of their lives.
Yeah, that's the constant backdrop against which all these events unfold.
It is.
That constant struggle to secure the most basic things, food, fuel, a decent place to live.
It's everywhere, isn't it?
It permeates every corner of their existence.
You really feel the weight of it in the excerpts. Relying on charity isn't just about getting help. It's about that heavy burden of shame, the loss of dignity.
Yeah.
Moments like the visit to Mrs. McGrath's shop or those interactions at the dispensary really drive that point home.
They do.
And the constant worry about something as basic as having enough coal to heat their home,
Right.
it just shows how precarious their lives were every single day.
And it's important to remember, poverty isn't just about lacking material things.
No, it's not.
It affects health, well-being, social standing, the mother's exhaustion, the kids getting sick so easily. Those are the direct, terrible consequences of their poverty. It's a stark reminder of the human cost of that kind of hardship.
It really is. And even with all that adversity, we see the narrator start to forge his own path as he grows up,
Yeah.
starting to become independent. Like working as a telegram boy, that exposed him to different parts of society, different ways of living.
Right.
And there are those hints of his changing thoughts about faith, about sexuality. Remember those dictionary explorations?
Yeah.
Those are telling. He's becoming more aware of his own identity as he approaches adolescence.
That's such a key turning point in the story.
It is, isn't it?
His relationship with Layman Griffin, so complex and ambiguous.
Yeah.
And then his decision to leave home.
Right.
Those are pivotal moments. They
Yes.
show him moving towards adulthood, wanting something more than his childhood in Limerick.
Yeah.
And it's a powerful statement about his resilience and his desire for a different future, all in the face of such difficult circumstances.
I agree. That choice to leave feels like it comes from everything we've talked about in these excerpts. So, as we wrap up this deep dive into Angela's Ashes, it's clear that we've seen an amazing example of family resilience in the face of crushing poverty in Limerick.
Oh, yeah.
We've seen how crucial storytelling and community are in providing comfort and connection. And we followed along as a young boy navigates hardship, loss, and those small but important joys of childhood.
Yeah.
These excerpts provide this powerful, poignant insight into a specific time and place. And they really shine a light on everyday struggles and the strength of the human spirit.
What's so powerful is how these personal stories touch on universal themes. Survival, connection, the lasting impact of our early years.
Absolutely. So here's a final thought for you to consider. Thinking about these glimpses into Frank McCourt's life, what enduring lessons or universal experiences resonate most with you, even across different times and cultures? Is it the incredible resourcefulness people show when facing seemingly impossible hardship? The strength of family bonds, even when there's conflict and disagreement? Or maybe it's how those early experiences shape who we become and how we see the world. We've only just scratched the surface here. I'd encourage you to dive back into the full text of Angela's Ashes. Really immerse yourself in this unforgettable story.
I think that's a great idea.
Thanks for joining me for this deep dive.
You too, that was great.
Until next time.
See ya.